Okay, class, we're moving on to 9.4, solve polynomial equations in factored form. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. For any real numbers a and b, if a equals 0, b equals 0, then a times b equals 0. The converse of this statement, so basically the reciprocal, the flip of the statement, is let a and b be real numbers. If a, b equals 0, then a equals 0 or b equals 0. So it'll make sense as we do some problems. Alright, so this is called factored form. So say I have this, x minus 4, parentheses times x plus 2 equals 0. You can think this is a and b. So we can go ahead and set a equal to 0. So it's real easy, it's just solving a one-step equation. Add 4 and add 4. So x equals 4, subtract 2, and x equals negative 2. So those are your two answers, all right? And you can go and you can check back in the original just to make sure. So if I put this back, 4 minus 4 equals 0, 0 equals 0, so 4 is true. Negative 2 plus 2 equals 0, so I'm plugging it into this, and then I plugged it into that one, and it does equal 0, so you know that negative 2 is one of the answers. Alright, so we are going to now start the beginning of factoring, okay? So I'm going to put this up so you can read it, and then we'll start working some problems. To solve a polynomial equation using the zero product property, that's what we just did, you may need to factor the polynomial or write it as a product of other polynomials. Look for the greatest common factor. That's a big deal. That's what we're going to start out by learning. Of the polynomial terms, this is a monomial with an integer coefficient that divides evenly into each term. That is what's important. So our greatest common factor divides evenly into each term. So let's go ahead and start with the few examples they've given us, and then I'll do some more. So here I have a term 12x plus 42y. Okay? So what you're looking for is something that divides evenly into both terms. Sometimes you got 3 terms, sometimes you got 4. So you have an x and a y, so that's not a common factor, but you have 12 and 42. So you've got to think, what goes into 12 and 42 that will come out of both of them? So hopefully you've realized that 6 divides into 12 and 6 divides into 42. Because remember, the greatest common factor, so we do the shortcut and just call it GCF. Nobody wants to write out greatest common factor, so in math you call it GCF and people know what you're talking about. You put the 6 out here, that's what you're dividing. 6 divides into 12x, giving us 2x, plus 6 divides into 42y, leaving us 7y. So that is the answer when you factor out the greatest common factor. And of course, if you're dividing, then multiplying should give you back the same answer. So I'm just going to show you how to check and see if what you've done is right. When I multiply back, I should get back the original 12x plus 42y. So 6 times 2x is 12x. 6 times 7y is 42y. So you can see you got back your original, so you know that that's correct, and you've taken out the greatest common factor. So let's try another one. 4x to the 4th plus 24x cubed. So there's two different things. There's a number and a variable. A number and a variable. So I start with the number first. What goes into 4 and 24? Well, 4, always check your smallest number and see if it divides into the biggest first. So 4 does go into 24. So 4 is part of the greatest common factor. Then you have exponents, x to the 4th and x to the 3rd. So you have to take the one that goes in both. So it can't be x to the 4th because I don't have 4 here. If I wrote this out, this is what you would look like. I'm not going to do this all the time, but we've done exponents before, so I want you to see, okay? I can't take 4 x's out because I don't have 4 here, but I can take 3 of them and I would have 3 here. So 4x cubed and 4x cubed is the greatest common factor. So the GCF for this one is 4x cubed. So when I take it out by dividing it, then, and that's what I want to show here, I showed it the long way here so you understood, but this is what you're going to be doing. So 4 divides into 4, leaving us 1, and if I have 3 x's on top and 3 x's in the bottom, 4 on top, I'm just left with an x. All right? 4 divides into 24 6 times, and the x to the third and the x to the third, anything that's the same top and bottom, leaves a 1. Now 1 times 6 doesn't change it, so the way you would write this is like that. And remember, cubed. Remember that you have to multiply, and you can check, and I'm going to do it one more time. 4x to the third times x gives me 4x to the fourth. 4x to the third times 6 gives me 24x cubed. Did I get back my original that I wrote down, which is here? And I certainly did. So that's how you check. Let me look and find another example. Okay, so here we go. If you want, it's good to try. So 14m plus 35n. All right, so look at that and think what you think could come out of that. So here, hopefully you can tell that 7 goes into 14 and 35. So I'd be dividing by 7. So on the outside, put the 7, and that would leave me 2m plus 7 into 35 is 5n. So you all know how to multiply and divide, and that's correct, and you can multiply back and make sure that it is correct. Okay? I'm going to do one more. 9m to the 7th minus 3m squared. Okay? So they want the greatest common factor. So I've got 9 and 3. So I know for sure 3. I always do the numbers first. And then you take the smallest exponent. They're both m's. 2 can go into both. 7 can't. So it's the smallest exponent. So 3m squared is the greatest common factor. 3 divides, so you write this here. 3 divides into 9 3 times. If I have 2 m's here and 7, so remember we're subtracting 2 from 7, I've got 5 minus, what do I put if I divide something? If I say 5 divided by 5, it's not 0. But plus and minus make a 0. Division will make a 1, right? So if I divide by the same thing, I have to put a 1, okay? Because I have to be able to check it. When I check back, I have to have that 1. All right, so you're just going to practice taking out greatest common factor. Now we're going to go where we take that concept at the beginning and we're going to solve an equation by factoring. So here we go. 2x squared plus 8x equals 0. So we're going to combine what we did in the first part and the second part and put them together. So we're going to take out the greatest common factor. So it tells us solve an equation by factoring. So we're starting with simple ones. Solve an equation by factoring. So the first thing you have to do is find the GCF. So I look here, 2x squared plus 8x. 2 is common to both. And then I have 1x and 2. Obviously, I take the smaller one, so 2x is the common factor. All right? Then I write it with the 2x on the outside. And when I divide, I'm left with an x here, because the 2 and 2 gives me 1. And x divided into x squared gives me an x. Remember, you're subtracting. Here, 2 divides into 8 4 times, and the x's cancel out. Go ahead and set this equal to 0. So now you're going to take it a step further, and you're going to go ahead and set them both equal to 0 and find the answer. So that's what we did at the beginning when they gave you the factors. So here's one, and here's the other. That's your A, that's your B. So 2x equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. Divide by 2. Sorry, let me lift that up a bit. And one of the answers is 0. 0 is an answer. And the other answer is x plus 4 equals 0. Subtract 4. You know how to solve a basic equation. You've been doing much harder ones than that. So the two answers are 0 and negative 4. So you took an equation here and you factored it, and then you found the two answers. So one of the answers is 0 and one of the answers is negative 4. Okay? The fact that it has a squared up here indicates that normally it has two different solutions. It can have two of the same, but normally they're different. So let's go ahead and do another one. Again, we're going to solve, and then we're going to set it equal to 0. So 6n squared equals 15n. So now they're not on the same side. A and B need to be on the same side, the two factors. So I'm going to set it equal to 0. Remember, you're setting it equal to 0. So 6n squared minus 15n equals 0. Then, when it looks like this, so they're giving you the same thing, they're just adding to it. So at the beginning, they already factored. Then you had to learn how to find the greatest common factor. Now you're just putting everything together because it has to be set equal to 0. So you just have to do a few more steps, that's all. Okay, now look here, 6 and 15 isn't the greatest common factor 3. Comes out of both, and I've got an n here, an n to the second power here. I'm going to take the smallest exponent. Okay, and I'm going to rewrite it with 3n on the outside, leaving me 3 divided into 6 is 2. N divided into n squared means you subtract, so you have an n left, minus 3n divided into 15 is 5, and then set that equal to 0. That's all you did now, is factor it, and you're setting them both equal to 0. So 3n equals 0, that's your A. The other factor is in the parentheses. 2n minus 5 equals 0. Divide anything into 0, and it's going to be 0. So that's one of your answers. Then the other one is just going to be a fraction. Plus 5, very basic two-step equation. 0 plus 5 is 5, divide by 2, and n equals 5 divided by 2. So there we go. So n equals 0, n equals 5 over 2, which is 2.5. All right, so I'm going to leave that, let you look at that for a second. Okay. All right, the last thing I'm going to do is show you a word problem. Since it's all written out here, it's always easier just to work with what they have here and work from there. So let's, okay, an armadillo. Wow. All right. Solve a multi-step word problem. Now they do give you this vertical motion model. This is used a lot in physics and things like this. So it isn't a physics equation that they came up with. The height h in feet of a projectile can be modeled by, this is a quadratic, height equals negative 16t squared plus v times t plus s. So what it's saying is, and we're going to get to this when we're factoring, it shapes like that. It's a projectile, okay, that you've shot off somewhere, and it can be very, go up and come down real quick, or it can go over a long period of time. So the t squared ensures that you have what we call a parabola. and we're gonna get into that shortly. The negative means that it goes this way. If I had a positive, it would go the other way. So I call it a frowny face, like you're frowning, okay? V is normally the vertical velocity in feet per second, and S is the initial height, so where they start off. So you could start off at the ground, or you could be up on a tower 10 feet up, and that would be your starting place, okay? And then you can plug in and solve this. So we're going to use this formula, and remember, all formulas are given to you. You don't have to memorize them. I always write them on the board, or if there's a bunch of them, I'll write them all down on a piece of paper and give them to you, or write them on the top of the test. So you've always got them. You don't have to remember the formulas. You just have to know how you're using them and what they mean. So solve a multi-step problem. So you've got a little armadillo. I guess he's startled. It says he jumps straight into the air with an initial velocity, so that's going to be important, so underline that. Initial vertical velocity of 14 feet per second, okay? So you know that that's your V is 14, so always write that down. After how many seconds does it land on the ground? So here's that formula that they've given you, all right? And you know that I just wrote down your vertical velocity is 14. Add plus 0 is in there for the height, because he's initially on the ground, all right? They didn't put him up anywhere, so he's on the ground and he jumps up. So the jumping up is the 14. The ground is a 0. And then go ahead and height equals, so anything plus 0 is insignificant. Negative 16t squared plus 14t. All right? So I'm going to work from there and move this and work out the rest, so you can see how we came up with that formula. So height equals negative 16t squared plus 14t. All right, so we want to solve, and it is a negative, but you're going to have to be able to handle negatives. So we're going to go ahead and we'll look for the common factor. Now, when it starts with a negative, it is always good to factor out a negative with the number 2. So I don't want to cut off. I realize doing that you can't see it. Okay, so what goes into 16 and 14? It is going to be 2, but I'm going to take out a negative 2. Okay, that's what I'm dividing by. And that means when I divide by a negative or when I multiply by a negative, all the signs change. So instead of that being a negative, that's going to be a positive 8. And also, sorry, I'm taking out a t too. So let me write this. I'm dividing by negative 2t. Because I have a t here and a t squared here. So the greatest common factor is negative 2t. Okay, so hopefully you see how we got that. And then that means that when I divide negative 2t, negative 2 into negative 16 gives me a positive 8, and I'm left with 1t. Now negative 2 divided into positive 14 leaves me a negative 7, and the t's cancel out. So now I have, this is my A and this is my B. So negative 2t equals 0, and 8t minus 7 equals 0. Okay? Divide by negative 2, and anything divided into 0 is just 0. And then here, 8t equals 7. Divide by 8, and you want a decimal because you're talking about a real number of something time, so you don't want to keep it as 7 over 8, so here you want to take it as a decimal. So you got 0 and you got 0.875. Okay, the armadillo lands on the ground after this. All right, the other one you just kind of ignore here. So the time is 0.875. Okay, because we already know he's at 0. So if he jumps up, it's not. We're going to ignore the 0 because it takes a few hundredths or thousandths of a second for him to jump up. And this is the only answer that really makes sense. The other one doesn't. All right? That's it for today, and we will be moving on to 9.5.